Welcome to Integrity Data. Today we're going to be going over how to set up a overtime rule. So we're going to go to configuration and then down to rule setup and over to OT policies. I've already got 3 in here. If you need to edit an overtime policy for any reason, you can do that through here. But be aware that when you edit something, it will go back and modify every open pay period. Whether that pay period is blocked or open, it will modify that based upon the rules that the people are attached to in the one that you modified. Now, this is not going to affect closed pay periods because, as we discussed in an earlier video tutorial, closed pay periods are a snapshot in time. And whatever we do from the time they're closed forward will not affect what those timesheets look like or how they've been calculated or anything like that. So to add a new PTO policy, I'm going to click Add New PTO Policy. I'm going to give it a code. I normally just choose 100, 200, 300, and so forth. If I need to go any deeper on the codes, if I've got a lot to set up, I may do 101, 201, 301, depending on what type of employees these codes are for and any subset of employees that are similar to these that might be needed. What you use in your codes is up to you or how you choose to do that. They should be short, 3 letters, numbers, combination of numbers and letters. I'm just going to go with 400, my next one on my list, and I'll give it a description. I'm not going to cover any blended OT. That's a different subject for here. We're just going to be talking about regular 40-hour and daily overtime stuff, which pretty much is what the entire United States uses, but that also Canada can make use of with a few changes as well. We don't need to add a new premium here. We're just going to edit what we have. We've already got 2 of these set up. However, this is based on time and a half, and this is based on double time. If we need to add something like 1.75, we would add a new premium. Or 3 times, triple time, we would add a new premium and define that. But 99% are just going to utilize one of these or both of these. So up here, I'm going to be doing daily overtime. If your state or company doesn't use daily, then I'll point out what not to add in as we're going through this. So I'll put daily and weekly. So the first one we're going to do is the time and a half. How do we want to configure our time and a half? We're going to click Edit. Our daily hours, if you do not have daily overtime, leave that at 0. I'm going to choose 8 for Union, California, places that utilize daily overtime. Otherwise, if you don't, just leave it at 0. Weekly, that's the big one. That's going to be 40 hours almost for every company in their weekly overtime. Now, Canada, it may be 44 hours. Some places for agricultural work could be 55, 60 hours. But basically, ask yourself, after how many hours in my work week am I going to get overtime? And that's going to be what your total is going to be here. Now, if you get overtime bi-weekly instead of weekly, you would leave weekly at 0 and fill in your total for bi-weekly. But again, this is the norm that we're looking at here. So I'm just going to click Save. So they get 8 hours of overtime, or they get overtime after working 8 hours in any day, and they get 40 hours that they have to reach before they get overtime for the week. For California and for those that get 2 or double time, we're going to set this up. We're just going to click Edit, pay double time. And again, this is normally for California and unions, but if your company pays double time, then you would utilize this as well. whether it be daily or weekly. So maybe weekly, an instance would be 60 hours. Anything over 60 hours in a week, they would get double time. And that works in conjunction with here because they get overtime from 40 hours to 60 and then double time after 60. So for our purposes, we're going to leave these blank. We're depending on this to give them their weekly overtime, but they are going to get double time after they've worked 12 hours in the day. This 12 hours includes the 8 regular hours they worked, and then it would also include 4 overtime hours to come out to 12 total hours in the day. Anything over that, they're going to get double time after the 12-hour mark. And we go ahead and click save. Our week definition, what day of the week does your employees start their overtime week? That's what you're going to put here. If your work week for your company is Sunday through Saturday, then you would use Sunday. Some companies can have pay periods that are semi-monthly. That means on the 1st of the month, it starts their pay period, and the 15th of the month, it ends it. Now, the 1st can begin on any day of the week. So your work week for your company could be anything. It could be Thursday to Wednesday. So this is where you're going to define your work week. And for this, the employee's work week is going to begin on a Sunday for overtime purposes, and it's going to end on midnight on Saturday. And then after that, they get into Sunday, the banks are reset, and they start building their 40 hours towards overtime again. The time is normally midnight to midnight. However, if your company is a little bit different, maybe it's 2 a.m. to 1:59 a.m. or 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. 7 a.m. to 7 a.m. You would utilize this here. The modification, normally at none, but some companies may want their overtime to go to the point where they clocked out. So this is kind of if you've got people working over midnight, what do you do, or how do you calculate those overtime hours? Do we do it based on when they clock out, on the day they clock out, or maybe the day they clock in? Flexible day definition. If you don't have anybody working over midnight, then OT week is fine. And again, the modification time here, and I made an error here. This is for the week. This is the overtime, where you're going to put that. And again, that's normally on none. This modification here defines the week, whereas this one's the day. Sorry, I did mean the day on this one. So this is for where do we do it? Do we split it? Do we do it on their start or their end? You could also pay X amount of hours for a minimum number of hours worked on here. So we might pay 4 hours for a minimum of, 1 hour worked. This isn't used that often. Then we have our pay period, same type of thing. If you have people working over midnight, this might be a better option for them, especially if they're clocking in and out over midnight, but you want their overtime to all go back to when they started, rather being split from one day to the next, especially on the end of a pay period. The punch match threshold, I usually set at 60 to 120 to match how long they could be taking lunch. So if somebody, takes lunch, they're basically clocked out. Then when they come back from lunch, they're basically clocked in again. And if that happens to be over midnight, maybe they take their lunch at 11:55 p.m. and come back at 12:30. Well, I want my punch match threshold to be over that so that it still considers that day to be one day and calculating based on the time they clocked in. And again, you've got your minimum for X. This is rarely used right here. I'm going to set these back to 0. Don't want to confuse anybody there, but if you're the type of company that utilizes that, you'll know what it's for. So the next thing is our consecutive day rule. Now, for most companies, you'll be done at this point if you're only using the 40-hour weekly and you don't pay different rates for weekend work. You would just be able to click save and then assign the employees to it. For those companies affected by the consecutive day rule, in other words, if I work 7 consecutive days in my company's work week, not just any 7 days in a row, but they have to be 7 days within that company's work week, then I would go in and set that up here. And the typical for California is on the 7th day, any hours worked up to 8 hours is going to be overtime. Anything over 8 hours is going to be double time. So this is where we would set that up. We click add premium on the 7th day. There may be some instances where companies utilize the 6th day. I'm just using the 7th for my example. And I'm going to say inclusive of the 7th day. And we're going to go down and choose work. I want to pay 1.5, which is time and a half, after 0 hours. I may choose to override weekend premiums here, depending on how I've got them set up. If I'm not setting them up, I'm just going to check this anyways. And I'm going to click save. So this one, since we're doing overtime and double time, we really want to do the double time first. We've got work selected. I want to pay 2 times after 8 hours and override weekend premiums. So when I'm dealing with consecutive day rule that has double time and overtime, I'm going to start with how we're handling the double time. Then I'm going to put in just the overtime, the 1.5. And we're going to leave that at 0, override weekend premium, and save. Now, there may be instances where my weekend premium is higher, and I would not have chosen to override my weekend premium. But if you do pay different based on people coming in on Saturday and Sunday, we can set that up here by turning this on and then choosing the pay type. And maybe 3 times their pay rate, or a percentage of their pay rate, or a fixed amount. So maybe a fixed amount would be, the employees in this particular policy make $10 an hour. I might make it $30 an hour. Do we want these hours to accrue towards their overtime? Remember, we talked about in an earlier video that the overtime for things like sick, or if it's accrued by hour worked and not pay period or annually or something like that, we can determine whether we want this particular thing to accrue or not accrue. And if you had anything for Sunday, you could do the same for Sunday as well. Any time spent working is going to show up as work on this one, whereas here we're going to have it show up as SILNIT. We're going to do 3 times pay rate, and I'm going to let them accrue on this one. So right now we've created our policy. We click save. There's 2 ways you can assign employees to this. The first is by clicking assign employees. You could select a card ID and then click filter and they'll show up, or you could do maybe department and marketing and then click filter. These are all the people in my marketing department. Maybe division, and I don't know who I've got in what divisions here. Let's say north, filter. There's only 1 person. So whatever you've got set up in here, you can filter the individuals by this. I'm just going to leave this all at all and click filter. I'm not choosing anything here, so I'm just going to click filter, and that brings in all of my employees. And from there, I can select quickly which ones that I want to attach to this rule. Once I've selected the employees, I click confirm, and they'll be attached to this rule, and any time they have in any open pay period will be adjusted based on the settings we've made in this rule. Now, if we're making another rule, the other area to be cautious of, or attentive to, I should say, is going to be the default profiles. So these default profiles determine which OT policy they get, and these are helpful if you're synchronizing from HR, or even if you're adding employees manually and utilizing the default profiles. You may need to change one of these profiles to match how that overtime is going to be used, or create a new default profile and attach that rule to it, maybe based on one of your other ones. Adding PTO to an employee manually, you would go to Employees, Employee Details, Edit, select the overtime policy, and then click Save. And that's all there is to creating a specific overtime policy for your needs. Thank you for watching.